So 5 minutes. So I'll do it in a tick. Yeah, we've got this. Okay. We had a great session. We've got 5 minutes to report back. I'm just going to do a couple of context things first, and then Bob's going to talk about a few of the recommendations, and then come back to me about what every single person in this room needs to do. So firstly, we would like to opt out of the journalists, please, for this. The group decided there are no notes up there because it's a picture and it's part of a much bigger conversation, a much bigger process. I'd also like to acknowledge that the words we're going to use in the next 5 minutes need a lot of work. Words are very important, and none of the words that we're going to use in this next little bit are locked in stone, and it's far be it for our little group that we had in the corner to, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah?
Yep.
Great. So we had a great discussion, and our question was, how do we support, keyword, First Peoples in achieving their goals? And in that time, it wasn't a sharing of all those goals. What we heard was a lot of reinforce what we've just heard from Leo, from Tristan, and what Bob reaffirmed. So we came up with 4 interconnecting recommendations. Bob, you're going to... And I'll just talk for a minute, and then I'll explain what the key headings are. The first one is that there needs to be a mission statement for this process written by the First Peoples, which is our top right. It's about the, what are the words you use, Bob? It's about the central, putting Indigenous peoples at the centre of everything. So that mission statement has to be driven and come from there. Sitting with that, and this line that connects here, is about authorisation processes to do stuff, and that very much sits in First Peoples' work that you're doing. And over here we have, which you heard a little bit there, what Tristan and Leo were talking about around the communication processes and the great work for years that's been done towards NIACA, etc. It's about First Peoples communications driving the agenda. So this solid line is what's coming from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural sector. And it's up to us to listen and keep them at the centre of that conversation. Bob, do you want to add to that before I talk about that?
I think that, is that on? Yep.
Hello.
You're
You
still
made
in your
that
skin,
happen,
mate?
Bob.
I'll put it here to remind you.
I think what I've realised, and I think most people realise, that you're here for one big purpose, and that is to basically be unison in basically trying to work with each other. And first, I think, in regards to Indigenous nations and peoples, is that you really need to start off with some kind of a statement, and principles and ethics in regards to what are you actually doing. We've referred to the issue of where you might want to start and start to give yourselves guiding principles would be the declarations on the rights of Indigenous peoples. So if you go down all those things, when we're talking about the visual, the performing arts, all those sorts of things, and cultural heritage things, land matters, environmental matters, about imposing or building policies and legislation and whatever else, then it cannot be imposed. It basically has to be guided on Aboriginal principles, so that an Aboriginal people have got to be a big part of that. The primary role and the responsibility must always be ours. All right? If you understand what that means, is we've always talked about, and you've probably heard almost a slogan these days, Aboriginal control of Aboriginal affairs. But it's a very, very strong principle that Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander peoples maintain. Now that's just a headline, basically, of a statement that Aboriginal people are trying to get across to governments and to others who are trying to draft policies, legislations and whatever else regarding Aboriginal people, or trying to engage with Aboriginal people or build things for Aboriginal people. But it's usually imposed on Aboriginal people. So you can't do those things, impose those on Aboriginal people, either without having the free, prior and informed consent of Aboriginal people. So it's not much point. going through the useless exercise and then trying to impose it on people. Well, we've lived through that, and that's the management days under the Aborigines Act, and we've come out. So we're now looking beyond the Act. You need to think about beyond the Act as well. So what are we actually talking about? We are talking about a call to consciousness. Everybody must be in this game together, whether it's to do with the arts or the politics or whatever else it is, health, housing, education and childcare and other cultural matters. But we must have the primary ownership, control and management and decision-making process. Where else am I?
I'll pick up. So that call to consciousness is our recommendation.
Yes.
So as far as the who, every single non-Indigenous person in this room, this is your action, is to take on your own cultural awareness journey. And there's a whole lot of processes. And we talked about the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We talked about other resources that exist. We talked about some great projects that have happened. We talked about how Footscray here have embedded Indigenous employment and voices at all levels of the organisation. So there's lots of resources to do that. But the recommendation is that it's every individual non-Indigenous person's responsibility to walk out of this room and in the next year, learn and listen and ask. Just on a process bit, so we are going to turn this infographic from our group, which will go back to our group to make sure that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in that group are okay with where we got to, and then that will go to the Ngayaka people to work on the words. And then those words will inform Ferals, if that's okay, is where we got with the process.
I think the other groups ought to be able to, like you're saying, they ought to come back with some kind of a statement. So it's a mission statement. But it's your guiding principles in regards to how we're going to work together and how you're going to basically... Aboriginal people are going to be looking for your support. You're going to have to do that or you're working against us. That's all.
Thanks. Thanks, Uncle Bob. I'm sorry, we should have said you can't tweet this.